You're listening to the Rural Press Club of Queensland's Lunch Series podcast.
Excuse me for interrupting, and it is great to hear so much conversation around all of the tables here, but it is time to pause now and hear from the man who's brought us all here today. My name is Nerali Roki, and I'm a committee member of the Rural Press Club. I did actually meet our guest speaker in Canberra when he attended and spoke at the first ever meeting of the National Rural Press Club in March 2016. I don't know if he recalls that evening, it was quite a lot of fun. The Honourable Joel Fitzgibbon MP is the member for Hunter. He's represented the regional farming and mining New South Wales electorate since 1996 with his office in Cessnock, just about 4 hours' drive from his birthplace of Bellingen, which is a tad closer to Queensland. Before entering politics, he was an automotive electrician and also a technical education lecturer. He also spent some time as a member of the Cessnock City Council. In the Australian Parliament, Mr Fitzgibbon has served as a Cabinet Minister from 2007 to 2010, holding the Defence and then the Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry portfolio in previous Labor governments. He is currently the Shadow Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, and also the Shadow Minister for Rural and Regional Australia. And within his own party, he is the founder of the Country Caucus, a group of federal Labor MPs and senators dedicated to promoting the interests of regional and rural Australia. Joel Fitzgibbon joins us today for the Rural Press Club's first luncheon of 2019, a federal election year, to talk about his aim of helping Australia capitalise on the growing global demand for high-quality food and fibre products. Please make Mr Fitzgibbon welcome. Yes, very impressive.
Thanks, Nerali. That's very generous. Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you. Like Trent, I acknowledge the difficulty our friends in North Queensland are facing at the moment. I know you're all thinking of them, and if there's anything that's bipartisan in politics, it's challenges like that, natural events like that, and we stand together to do whatever we can to help people in need. Both Nerali and Trent generously made reference to my time as Agriculture Minister, all 11 weeks of it. I describe it as the golden era in agriculture. I'm fortunate to be able to say I've got many friends in the room. I can't acknowledge them all, and I know I'll be forgiven by sounding out just a couple of them, present and former colleagues. Senator Anthony Chisholm is my wingman on all matters rural and regional Australia. He's a strong representative for the state of Queensland. I appreciate him being here today, but I appreciate the work he does with me in Canberra, progressing the needs of rural and regional Australians. Bernie Ripple, we miss you dearly. You are looking well, and you're obviously doing great work keeping the Rural Press Club alive and strong. And Simon Crean, who I still have a bit to do with, as you can imagine. He's looking surprisingly well, actually. Even younger than he was when he left Canberra, despite some of the challenges he's been grappling with, but certainly he's applying all the skills and strategic thinking he learned in many years in politics to the role he has today. So I thank the Press Club for the opportunity to share a few thoughts about what a Bill Shorten Labor government might look like. We take nothing for granted, of course. The bookies are saying one thing. I'm very cautious, and indeed what that might mean for rural and regional Australia. I also thank all of you for coming along in such strong numbers. It's really appreciated, but I'll ask you in advance to forgive me if I throw in one or two partisan comments. We are, after all, at the pointy end of the political cycle. I vividly remember when people used to front me in the street and complain that there's nothing between the major political parties anymore. Well, I think we fixed that. Indeed, as I was walking out of my Brisbane CPO office, I saw Peter Dutton on television confirming that in his inevitable way. Labor's agenda is pretty simple, but it's very quite clear. We want to grow the Australian economy, and we want to ensure that everyone has the opportunity, every Australian has the opportunity to benefit from Australia's success. Opportunity, of course, being the operative word. So, to give them that opportunity, we are determined to invest in them. That's why a Labor government will give every Australian child a chance at preschool education. It's why we will fully fund the Gonski school reforms. It's why we will rebuild our TAFE system and vocational and educational training more generally. And it's why we will, importantly, restore funding to Primary Industries Education Foundation of Australia, a great not-for-profit group giving our school teachers the tools they need to provide our children with a better understanding of where our food comes from and how it's produced. To grow the economy, we also need investment in transport and telecommunications infrastructure. Access to education and improvements in infrastructure are particularly important to the fortunes of the agriculture sector and therefore rural and regional Australia. Now, of course, these commitments require money, and lots of it. And that's why Labor has made some pretty bold but fair commitments to reform parts of the economy and some of the rules within our economy. We'll reform the negative gearing system, dividend imputation arrangements, and the capital gains tax regime, just to name a few. And we'll use those billions of additional dollars to invest in people and projects. Now, the Morrison government will claim that if re-elected, it will do that too, but without meaningful tax reform. We don't believe them, because the trickle-down economics model will not deliver in the same way as real and meaningful tax reform. It simply won't cut it. In any case, their track record over more than 5 years gives us reason to be concerned that the government's infrastructure commitments cannot be believed. Their woeful performance on the NBN rollout is an example in point, and I know many of you in this room have been frustrated by it. On roads infrastructure, not only have they been budgeting less than the former Labor government, but they've not been spending what they've allocated. Indeed, the budget papers show that in the last 4 years, the difference between what they allocated to major road projects and what they actually spent was $2.8 billion. A Labor government will also use the dividends of tax reform to invest in our health and hospital systems. Now, I have a long-standing interest in regional policy and regional dispersal. And one of the many things I've learned over many years of consultation and research is that the key to attracting the people we need in the regions, or indeed keeping the people we already have in our regions, is good local community health, educations and telecommunications facilities. The other thing I've learned is that the regional economies or communities that do best are those which are led by energetic and innovative people, people with strong policy and leadership credentials. In other words, we believe in a bottom-up decision-making approach. That's why when we were last in government, we strengthened the relationship between Canberra and our local councils and then brought them into the decision-making processes. That's why we established the Regional Australia Institute, to provide the research needed to make the right and sound decisions. Evidence-based policy must always prevail over pork barrelling and boondoggle exercises. The current government, by contrast, gave local government anything but love when it froze the indexation of its federal assistance grants and cut funding to Regional Development Australia. Possibly an initiative of Simon Crean, actually, RDA. I hope that's right, Simon. You were certainly involved. Of course, strong rural economies need a strong agriculture sector. And all the things I've mentioned, people, services and infrastructure, are critical to lifting agribusiness productivity and sustainable profitability. But there are many more agriculture-specific policy issues to be addressed if we are to realise our ambitions, to embrace all the opportunities that are before us and to overcome the challenges. Our food and fibre sectors are in desperate need of the capital required to drive scale and to build the on-farm infrastructure needed to lift productivity and to build resilience and diversity. There are, of course, only two sources of investment, domestic and foreign. On the latter, the government could not have done more over the last 5 years to stand in the way of capital inflows into the agriculture sector, particularly capital inflows from our north. The Labor government will never play politics with foreign investment rules. It's too important an area for that political exposure, or indeed populist policies. On the domestic front, people often and understandably lament the fact that our superannuation fund managers don't pay sufficient attention to the agriculture sector. But people are often too quick to offer simplistic explanations and solutions to this problem. The sobering words of industry expert Gary Weaven have always stayed with me. When on ABC radio last year he said, and I quote, he put it very, very simply, in quotes, "The returns are quite low in relation to the risk and volatility of the investment." Now, here's our words which we should all reflect on deeply and regularly. We should not be kidding ourselves about the realities of some of the challenges we face in this regard. We think agriculture is special. It's the sector that feeds us, and it is. But for the investor or the funds manager, there's nothing special about agriculture. The money will flow to agriculture when the funds managers think there is a bigger buck to be made there than by investing in some other asset class. And while they are obviously an important part of the equation, the success of the sector, in the investor's eyes at least, is not measured only by volume of product produced, the prices secured, or even numbers exported. No, the numbers that really matter to them are profit and return on investment over time. That's the bottom line for our investors and our funds managers. Now, fogging up their reading glasses are two key common concerns: perception and risk. While there are exceptions to the rule, sadly, when farming or agriculture is in our newspapers, it's all for the wrong reason. And making that worse is that too often politicians are quick to run to the cameras to reinforce the negative message. I regret all of that. I don't think it helps us at all or encourages foreign investment or investment domestically. On the risk front, investors balk at least 7 things. The first is the vagaries of agricultural export markets and our heavy exposure to them. The second is growing global competition in our key export markets. Third, commodity price falls over time in real terms. 4, increasing foreign investment hurdles. 5, the constant presence of agri-politics and the ever-present risk of irrational government intervention. 6, the uncontrollable and unpredictable influence of weather events, climate change, and the sector's dependence on natural rainfall. And 7, rising community concern about the treatment of animals and the health of Australia's natural environment. Now, that's a lot of concern to overcome. We have a big task ahead of us if we are to capitalise on rising global food demand for clean, green, safe quality food, the thing we are best known for. Now, I want to work with the sector to overcome these barriers to investment. And government certainly has a role to play in helping the agriculture sector meet its aspirations. No one farm business or group of farm businesses can hope to secure access to export markets on fair terms alone. That's the work of government, and it will be a priority for a Shorten Labor government. Farmers alone can't protect our product from pest and disease or guard our reputation and brand. That's primarily the role of government, and biosecurity will be a priority for me. as is ensuring our farmers have timely access to the chemicals and animal medicines they need, and the chemicals and animal medicines that the community can trust. And you won't be surprised to hear me say that if elected, I suspect to inherit some challenges on that front. We can't fulfil our aspirations if we don't have the world's best research. The need to aggregate investment and the challenges of spillover demand government involvement and indeed leadership. I'm energised by the prospect as a Minister of ensuring that every dollar we invest in research is a dollar efficiently and effectively invested. Money is too short to do otherwise. The majority of our farm entities are small and lack market power. Government has a key role in ensuring they are not subject to market power abuse. Trade practices law has always been an area of intense interest for me, and I intend to ensure that the balance is struck. Trade-exposed industries can only compete if governments keep costs down. Costs like energy are key issues for the agribusiness sector, and a short and Labor government will deliver an overdue architecture for our energy system which gets investment flowing again and drives costs down. Government has a key role to play in the management, health and efficient allocation of our natural resources, an area which has been largely vacated by the current government, although it has shown a keen interest in water, but usually for the wrong reasons. But there is one further big task we need to tackle together. We've all become very familiar with the term disruption. And when we talk disruption, most of our conversation takes us to technology and the impacts it's had. Uber, Airbnb are the common examples that come to our minds. And technology will, of course, impact on our agribusiness sector as well, but thankfully, mainly in a positive way. But there are two other forms of disruption which will continue to challenge us. The first is a changing climate, and the second is changing community attitudes. We should see the latter not just a challenge, but as an opportunity. We need to harness changing community attitudes and food preferences and turn them to our advantage. Let us be in no doubt, consumer preferences will continue to evolve, and we need to evolve with them. More and more, they'll want our producers to respect the welfare of animals, and they'll want our product produced in a sustainable and ethical way. They are also growing more health conscious, and each day a wave of information comes before them, typically on social media, about healthy eating and giving advice on what to eat or not want to eat. Some of it true, some of it not so accurate. So they're voting with their feet, and we will continue to do so in increasing numbers, both here and on our export markets. But as a wealthy and innovative nation, Australia is well placed to give consumers what they want, just as our savvy fast food retailers have responded to their changing consumer ask. But let me share two anecdotes. 3 years ago, I released Labor's animal welfare plan. It was in the lead up to the 2016 election. I would argue with considerable confidence that the plan I released, the 6-point plan, was a sensible and measured document. The industry opposed it, but following further controversy, it now supports it. 8 months ago, following another bad incident in the live sheep sector trade, I came to the conclusion that the live sheep sector was unsustainable and posed a risk to Australia's reputation on export markets and posed a risk to the social licence of the live cattle export sector. The live sheep sector initially argued that the Awassi Express controversy was an isolated incident and there was nothing really to see. The trade, they told us, was just fine. 8 months on, the industry has voluntarily suspended much of its operations and is attempting to embrace new regulatory measures which are much tougher than those it would have faced if it had moved earlier. And I want to acknowledge the leadership Simon Crean has shown in that area. He's been excellent to work with and he's doing a great job for his members. But in both cases, the sector opposed change only to be forced later to embrace it. But along the way, they suffered even more reputational damage. Attacking and demonising those who raise environmental and animal welfare concerns while defending the status quo, no matter what it looks like, has proven to be a failed strategy. We have to accept that the status quo does not always look right to them, whether we like it or not. And we need to move with consumer expectations or risk losing the initiative. There has to be a better course, and politicians and industry leaders must work together to chart that better course. Together we need to anticipate change and work with those in the sector who are not moving sufficiently quickly to accommodate growing opposition to what they see, in some cases, as outdated practices. We need to swim with the rising tide and surf the currents of activism to a more sustainably profitable place, just as the red meat sector has done by pledging to be carbon neutral by 2030. They're ahead of the game. When these issues are raised, they say we have a plan. And there are many other examples of that in the sector. But putting the barricades up and shouting, or attempting to shout louder than they are shouting, is counterproductive. And I have a tip to you. As time goes on, you will lose, or we will lose. There are smarter ways. Like a more strategic response will better serve producers, fishers and growers. Those who have already moved will benefit because it protects their reputation and the reputation of the sector. And it helps those who have fallen behind because together, government and industry can best help them if we are all singing from the same hymn sheet. And governments will be more willing to invest to help those who have fallen behind if they know we have a plan, a strategic plan to accommodate the change and to lift sustainable profitability. Yes, there'll be those on the extreme left with multiple agendas. They will stay up with us, and I will stand with the sector to stare them down. We must. And we've seen some examples of that of late. But we've got to be careful to differentiate between genuine mainstream concerns and those coming from those with extreme agendas. But to win and maintain the trust of the growing majority who are listening to the debate, we need runs on the board. We need to demonstrate that we are moving, and we need to be able to point to the things the industry has already achieved or is on track to achieve. We don't talk enough about our environmental and animal welfare achievements. We don't talk about them regularly enough, and we don't talk about them convincingly enough. Together, we need to do better. Our natural resource base is in decline, and our ecosystems are under enormous stress. Agriculture policy, in my mind, should begin and end with a focus on our natural environment, our natural resource base. Next to technology, probably the most likely place to secure productivity gains and to produce the best defence to drought is by caring and rejuvenating and regenerating our natural resource base, making sure it's consumed in an efficient way. Now, I'd like the opportunity to build a consensus that our soil and water resources should be our overarching policy priority. And if we can achieve that, to then work with the sector to secure the best policy responses which achieve and secure sustainable profitability. And I've deliberately repeated that term a few times. Of course, success will require strong partnerships between politicians and industry, but partnerships between the Commonwealth and the states. And that's why one of my priorities is to restore a formal COAG process after the abolition of the Standing Council on Primary Industries. Now let me conclude with a little bit of history. When Kevin Rudd made me his Agriculture Minister all those years ago, seems it, a few of the usual suspects popped up and they said, how could he be the Agriculture Minister? He wouldn't know one end of a cow from the other. Fair cop. So you can imagine how relieved I was that the wool price didn't collapse when a newly minted Prime Minister in Scott Morrison said he doesn't pretend to know one end of a sheep from the other. So I think that's been levelled out. But of course, I did know a bit about agriculture before Kevin appointed me as Agriculture Minister because by then I'd been representing a rural electorate for some 17 years. Now that doesn't mean I didn't step onto a steep learning curve. I did, and every new minister does. But 5 years on, I'm still learning, particularly some of the lessons of agri-politics. Now I'm sure there are farmers capable of making a good agriculture minister, but I've seen no evidence that it's a necessary prerequisite. Quite the contrary, in my view. Indeed, I believe non-farmers have an advantage, and Simon was one of them. They are not subject to peer pressure, they have no vested interests, and they bring no preconceived ideas or prejudices to the job. The agriculture portfolio requires the same skill set as any other portfolio. Public policy is public policy. Economics is economics. A market is a market. The same rules apply. The minister's role or challenge is to weigh up the advice, often competing advice, and to apply sound decision-making principles. Evidence-based policy is always the best policy and always produces the best results. Knowing where the role of government begins and ends is also of critical importance. It's an important skill, but all important too is the ability to persuade the Cabinet colleagues and to take them with you. So if I'm given the opportunity to serve as the Agriculture Minister again, doing these things well will be my focus, and applying good policy for the right outcomes will be my focus. I bring no particular agenda other than doing that. On the policy front, my guiding objectives will again be productivity and sustainable profitability. And I'd love the opportunity to take the conversation about our food and fibre sector to a higher and more sophisticated plane. While it's important to know where we've been, I prefer to look forward to a modern, efficient and high-tech sector using the latest and best innovation off the back of the best research we can provide. I want to talk more about agriculture, more talk about agriculture in our capital city boardrooms and in the financial pages of our newspaper, but all for the right reasons. I want us to think big, not small, to speak positively, not in negative tones, to speak at least as much about product value as we do about product volume. And I want the sector to be open to positive change in a rapidly changing world. When city folk think of a farmer, I want them to think as much about a farmer on a laptop as they do about a farmer on a tractor. United and strong, I believe we can do big things. So let's get on with it. I believe we don't have a moment to lose. Thank you very much.
You've been listening to the Rural Press Club of Queensland's Lunch Series podcast. To book a ticket to our next event, visit our website at ruralpressclub.com.au. Music supplied by audionautics.com.